Good morning and good evening, depending where you are, and welcome to CCG China and World Dialogue Series. I'm the host of the series, and I'm also the founder and the president of Center for China and Globalization. So in the past January, we just celebrated the Lunar New Year in China and entered the Year of the Rabbit. Now we are back with another episode of the CCG Global Dialogue Series. And in the past episode, we actually talked to business leaders, senior diplomats, and scholars, including Ray Dalio, Richard Haas, John Hammer, and Larry Summers, for example, just in the last several months. And now this time we have two very distinguished guests. Both are senior diplomats in Asia affairs. Please allow me to introduce them one by one. First, I'd like to have an introduction to Ms. Susan Thornton. Susan is a senior fellow and a research scholar at the Yale University Law School Privatized China Center. She's also the director of the Forum on Asia Pacific Security at National Committee on American Foreign Policy and a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. She's a retired senior U.S. diplomat with almost 3 decades of rich experience. She was acting assistant secretary for the East Asia and Pacific Affairs at the Department of State, and she led the East Asia policy making and served in leadership position in the U.S. Embassy in Central Asia, Russian, the Cyprus, and China. I remember Susan also was the Consul General of U.S. Consulate in Chengdu. We hope we can resume that sometime. So Susan, thank you for joining us today from Montana. And also have another old friend, and also, of course, joining us today is Dr. Douglas Paal. He's a now resident scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He previously served as a vice chairman of J.P. Morgan Chase International and was an official U.S. representative to Taiwan as the director of American Institute in Taiwan. He was on the National Security Council staff of President Reagan and George H.W. Bush between 1986 and 1993 as a director of Asia Affairs, and then as senior director and a special assistant to the president. I remember very well many times we visited Carnegie, and Doug was really hosting us there. And he held also a position in the policy planning staff at the State Department as a senior analyst for the CIA and also at the U.S. Embassy in Singapore and in Beijing. So it's really a great honor to have you both join us today, also the CCG Global Dialogue Series. I want to start, I mean, we just recently, there's a lot of things happening and since we planned this dialogue, and we know that President Biden just gave a talk at State of the Union just about a day ago. And of course, also, we had a balloon incident actually happened, that between China and the US. I think that I noticed from the President Biden's State of Union speech was largely about domestic. You know, he mentioned about China. He said he wants to compete, not confront. But also he said, he wants to cooperate with China whenever that's beneficial to the U.S. and the world. So probably I just have a quick time of the subject. Maybe Susan can give a bit of recent atmosphere, and of course also after that I'd like to have Doug to give us. So Susan, maybe your opening remark, and I ask Susan to go first.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Henry, and thanks very much for having us at this really, I think, pivotal time in U.S.-China relations. There has been an awful lot going on recently, but maybe I'll just start and reflect a little bit on the most recent event, which was President Biden's State of the Union address last night. He had a clear focus, I think, on 2 things, really, mainly on shoring up America's strengths internally, especially the economy. He talked a lot about jobs, about U.S. manufacturing, different domestic policies he was going to pursue to make sure that America was, stronger, that people saw opportunities. He talked about U.S. being a land of possibilities, and clearly he's very focused on that. And he used the speech really to tout a lot of the achievements that he's made in the last 2 years in passing legislation to try to move the ball forward in a lot of these areas of restoring U.S. Domestic economic resilience and dynamism, I think. I mean, he also talked about shoring up relations with America's allies a little bit, but didn't really talk much about international issues. Usually these speeches are not much on foreign policy. But there was a focus on Russia's war in Ukraine, and there was this reference to continuing the competition with China. But I think we have seen some efforts, and we're going to probably talk about the balloon, which unfortunately derailed the most recent efforts. But I think he did hint at efforts to restart diplomacy with China. As you said, he mentioned we don't want conflict. I think it's difficult to restart that diplomacy now with the sort of recent events and internal political dynamics, which I know we'll talk about. But I think it was a clear indication that President Biden is looking to sort of tamp down rhetoric and right size the kind of rhetoric and attention that negative attention in the U.S.-China relationship right now.
Yes, thank you, Susan, for a great highlight of what recent what activities in the U.S., particularly Biden's State of Union speech. So I'm quite actually encouraged by the Biden and President Xi summit in Bali. I mean, last year, which is paved the way. Looks like 2023. We hope to get a floor, build it up. We have a Blinken visit, we have a Yellen visit, we have probably more Secretary of Commerce or USTR visit, and also Chinese visit, senior official visit to the US. G20 in India in September. We have an APEC in November in San Francisco. So there's a lot of chance that we can really upgrade a bit of stabilize a bit of the situation, particularly the U.S.-China relation. So for this to go ahead. So what are the Susan, probably I start with you again, and what are your expectations on how we can maintain this dialogue? I mean that the momentum that President Biden and President Xi set it in Bali, and because Blinken also said he wants to visit China as soon as possible, as time is right. So we hope that these things can be really taking place as soon as possible. So perhaps Susan, you can give some assessment on your side.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a former diplomat, so I really do believe in having discussions and trying to negotiate and get progress on topics. I have to say on this balloon incident that I, agree that it was handled with quite a bit of care and thoughtfulness. I think on the U.S. side and on the Chinese side, I was quite taken by the Chinese statement of, that it was an accident, force majeure, that there was regret that it went into U.S. airspace, and a full admission that it was China's balloon, and that they regretted that it had happened. I think, what I hope is that we could use this incident as a way to try to make the communications more sustainable and more stable and more effective between our two sides. And, one of the reasons that Tony Blinken wanted to make his visit to Beijing, following up on the meeting between the two presidents in Bali, was in order to talk exactly about this problem that we have. Our communication channels have become so truncated, so narrow, that it is very hard. We have such a complicated relationship with all kinds of issues, and yet we only have, at this point, really the channel between the two presidents, which obviously can't be exercised every day, or even, every month. So we've really got to get some channels established. And one of the things that I think the US side feels is particularly urgent is a channel that we can use to clarify what's happening in exactly the kind of situation that we faced over the weekend. And I understand that there were, efforts to get more information and get clarification, and time is ticking. And this has been a longstanding problem, I think, in US-China relations, is to try to get information quickly so that people don't have to make assumptions, because when people make assumptions in some of these cases, they assume the worst, and that's not what we want. We don't want worst case kind of assumptions being made in this relationship. We want to be operating based on facts and reality, to the extent we can get the information from the other side. So I hope that, as we go through this year, building up to, as Doug said, the APEC summit, we can start to establish some of these relationships. Actually, we need interpersonal relationships so that we know each other and have these communication channels. I really hope also that we could start using the embassies and the consulates better. I mean, you mentioned my long career in the State Department. I served in a couple of different posts in China. These are really important connections to have, and we haven't really made full use of them, I don't think, in the recent period. And I also would like to say that in addition to the high-level meetings I hope we'll have, you mentioned Janet Yellen, some of the other economic meetings we hope will happen, maybe Gina Raimondo, maybe Catherine Tai. But we've also got to get people-to-people ties going again, and that means flights and visas. So on the bilateral front, and you mentioned a whole bunch of other issues in the sort of global challenges, which I also want us to work on, climate change, et cetera. But right now, I think, getting these communication links and travel links and exchange links reaffirmed and going again is for me a top priority.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I think the communication dialogue, resume the people-to-people exchange is very crucial. So good thing about it is that China now is probably getting out of this COVID and zero COVID status now. The tourism is reviving. We hope to have more flights resumed. We know that some U.S. airlines going to resume their flight, direct flight from U.S. We hope that can reach the level of before the pandemic. And actually, I was at an event at the Tsinghua University yesterday. They talk about how to build Beijing International Exchange Center. And they said they have 2 international airports. The capacity could handle 200 million people. So we hope we have more visits. But absolutely, the student exchanges, tourism, and also you're right, all the representation from both China and the U.S. at embassy, consulates. Maybe we should resume the consulate that closed in Houston and Chengdu, and also journalists. We could probably welcome more journalists visiting each other in both countries, and that really helps. And I think the momentum set up by President Xi and President Biden at Bali, we hope that the working team, but also the whole society, now given the pandemic is over, largely, these 3 years of isolation can be really resumed, and we really look forward to that. I know I just mentioned about there's some economic there's some seems that alliance that President Biden pursued in the neighborhood of in the region of Asia, for example. But China also wants to join CPTPP and DPA and even IPAF. Probably China could be interested in that as well. So let's have more economic dialogues, and rather than all the security dialogue, dialogue like Quad or AUKUS. So probably, what's your think about this? We're getting into a new administration. The U.S. has a new Congress, and China has a new going to in next month. We're going to have a new government set up in place. So maybe we start some a good communication, and we hope that this balloon incident is very temporary, and we can resume the cool heads. I really agree with Susan that we should not assume the worst scenario. We should really try to think of the let's get more informative exchanges, and then get more dialogues and get more visits. So what's your take, Doc? Maybe I can hear from you too.
Well, I endorse everything that Susan said about needing to improve dialogue and institutional cooperation. I will have to say that with the shooting down of the balloon, it's not over. The event itself has come to a finite end, but the aftershocks will continue as revelations take place, as the equipment is found, analyzed, official announcements or leaks from official findings will make their way into the media. And I think that's going to create a sense of urgency that maybe we haven't brought to our discussion yet this evening. You have to light a backfire against this coming series of revelations early on. The failure to communicate military to military during the weekend when this balloon was still in the air is going to sit very awkwardly with the United States public and with Congress and with the administration. And it would be smart for both sides, especially for the Chinese side, to start being more responsive before events start to accumulate again and accounts come forward about this or that intention. Try to get this back into channels that can be managed between the two sides, and where both sides have a stake in outcomes that are constructive rather than endlessly negative. And so I would introduce urgency into this. Don't wait another few months and then hope that we can patch it all up in August or September before the leaders meet. This is something that needs to be addressed much sooner. And the background to all of this is also the growing Chinese strategic capability. China has long avoided dialogue on strategic arms issues, saying that China was disadvantaged by small numbers against superpower levels of capability in strategic arms. But China has now, in the process of greatly enhancing its strategic arms capabilities, and it needs to begin the process alongside what I was just discussing of direct military to military communication, conversations about strategic arms, whether it's protocols, concepts, launch on warning, and hopefully over time, this will lead to some understandings about what's enough, what do we need more of or less of, that mark the era of SALT and START talks in the competition between the USSR and the United States. That's kind of behind us now. China represents the new arrival on the global scene, and we have to find a place at the table for China to discuss these issues as well.
Yes, thank you, Doug. I think you're right. You know, we have to really have more intensive communication dialogue, not let the incident really blew out of proportion. Because I really think, you know, there's satellite, there's many other things. You know, we probably had to bloom over each other, you know, now and then. And but then, absolutely, let's communicate. Let's not, you know, get this out of control. Particularly, I think China, from my perspective, this time is quite reserved, and you know, we clarified, and of course, and we hope that you know, this can be really discussed as we have a mechanism to sort it out, and you know, and let's get over to all those bigger issues that impact in bilateral relations and globally. So I really appreciate your comment.